Good morning, everybody. Welcome to the Dr. Irish Show on I Worship 96. I'm your host for today, Alexis Raekwon. May is a mental awareness month in the United States, and Dr. Ira wanted to dedicate one segment to this cause. The statistics are alarming. The World Health Organization reports that close to 800,000 people die to suicide every year, which is one person every 40 seconds. Suicide is a global phenomenon and occurs throughout the lifespan. There are indications that for each adult who died by suicide, there may have been more than 20 others attempting suicide. Statistics show that in the United States, suicide is the second leading cause of death for people aged 10 to 34, and the fourth leading cause of death for those aged 35 to 54. Men have a higher rate of successful suicides than women suicides than women, 21.1% versus 14.2%. Death by firearm was accounted for as the main method of suicide for men, with suffocation being the leading cause of suicidal deaths for women. Our guest today presented a workshop on suicide last week to bring awareness and mental health. He is a recent college graduate from Wesley College with a bachelor's degree of science in pre-professional physical therapy. He is the oldest of three boys, a member of Phi Beta Sigma fraternity, a minister at his church, and he is only 23 years old. He has been recently featured on a podcast entitled The Mandate, and he is relaunching his very own podcast entitled The King's Tales. Please, I Worship 96 family, help me welcome this morning's guest, Mr. Rex Chege. Good morning, Rex. How you doing, sir?
Good morning, brother Alexis Raekwon. It's very nice to have this opportunity. First and foremost, I always like to give glory and honor to God for if it was not for him, I would not be in the position that I'm in right now. And also extending honor and thanks to Dr. Ira for the opportunity.
Yes, sir. Okay. We have a couple questions. The first question, I'll start off by saying this. Although I read the short introduction about you, the question for our listening audience is, who is Rex Chege?
Oh man, getting right into it, huh? Uh, I would say that based off of my views on myself, Rex Chege he's a people's person. I definitely love helping others. I think that's one of the main attributes that people pick up on when they first meet me is I'm always willing to help others. Sometimes at the expense of my own sanity and happiness, which is something that I have been working on over the years. And fortunately enough, I have gotten better at that. But I would definitely say that I'm dedicated towards helping the people.
Wow. I definitely see that since I've been to the same college, Wesley College. I seen you on campus. People, it's crazy to see how people just come up to Rex, hey Rex. A lot of people. That is very accurate. What inspires you to do a presentation on suicide? Do you know people who have committed suicide?
I do, unfortunately. Not only has it been the people around me, but when you've been through traumatic events yourself and have dealt with a whole bunch of personal problems that, for the longest time, especially being a Black man in America with the cultural and societal stigmas, we're not really told that we can express ourselves emotionally. And so I had a lot of pent up frustrations and anger and confusion. And I remembered there were two instances in my life where I had contemplated suicide. And that was when I was 16. That was after I experienced a very severe breakup. And yeah, I won't lie, I was heartbroken and I just didn't know how to process it. And the second time was when I was a junior in college and I was overwhelmed with everything that was going on with my personal life, family stuff going on back home, and then of course just the stresses of being in college. So I knew that it's something that definitely needed to be talked about, and definitely people need to know more specifically what causes suicide and how to manage your mental health, so that, you know, it always is the worst case scenario when someone does take their own life. But if
Yeah.
they know how to manage themselves and practice some very good self-care tips, then that could help prevent suicide in the long term.
Mm-hmm. It's crazy because suicide is something that is talked about, but not that openly. I noticed that it's crazy to see people not speak up. I was one. I feel as though I thought about suicide, but I never really took it that far, but it has been a thought. And it comes from not really communicating. You just holding something in, stress, and you don't want to speak up because you feel like somebody might just act like, oh, it's nothing, it's not that serious, or they try to put, they try to do things like that, and it's kind of it's heartbreaking because you just hold so much in until something happens, like a breakup,
Mm-hmm.
and you realize that, dang, this is real. Like, it happens, and there's many people that I know, and it's just about speaking up, because you feel as though if you feel as though that you're by yourself, there's nobody there for you, so you don't say nothing. You get what I'm saying? You just
Yeah.
go on, and it comes up, and you got to just address it. But speaking about that, what is one myth that you had to debunk concerning suicide and who it affects?
So for the longest time, just based off of what we hear in the media and what society tells us, especially about emotions,
Mm,
for the longest time, I always thought that, when it came to depression and suicide, that women had the higher number of successful suicides than men. Um, and only to find out, like, once I did my research, I was like, oh wow. And this is the statistic
yeah.
that I have found. Women attempt more suicides, but men are more successful in
Mm,
actually carrying out the act.
mm,
And the main reason behind that is women are very social creatures. So before they even get to the act of committing, they'll talk to somebody about it, or they'll drop subliminals, and they'll reach out to those people that are in their immediate support group, and those people will help them talk them off of off of the edge. Whereas with
mm,
men, we tend to, especially when you're dealing with prideful men, we tend to
yes.
try and tackle all of our problems at once, or handle it on our own, and we won't really tell anybody what it is and what's going on. So
Mm-hmm.
once I was found out that statistically men are more successful when they do attempt suicide, it all made sense, and I was able to debunk that myth that I had.
Wow, that is so true. Mm. So, could you paint a picture for the audience of what leads to suicide ideation? Actually, like, or like the act of, you kind of answered that question, so I'll just go to the next one. I see in your research that you had a traumatic event, um, and it was actually a shift in your behavior. Have you
Mm.
ever, I feel as though, does that too lead to suicide?
Oh, 100%. I would say that, just speaking from personal experience, one probably the most prevalent traumatic event, especially in the latter years of my adolescence when I was a teenager, was you know learning how to deal with my father's alcoholism. It was something that deeply affected not only myself but our family dynamic as a whole. And it with a person that deals with alcoholism, it does you're almost seeing them in a completely different light. And they put when they're in that state, they put you through a whole bunch of emotional, verbal, and mental abuse. And they say some things that they don't even remember once they come out of that state of being drunk. And that, on top of all of the other stresses that I face,
Mm,
with going to college and playing a sport and being a leader on campus, one thing that I learned about myself, is sometimes I would pick up responsibilities or leadership roles to forget about the things that I was dealing with.
mm,
And that's something that I realized was almost in a sense a defense mechanism, because I didn't want to deal with the very hard stuff that was going on in my life. It was a lot easier
Right.
for me to run away from it. But
Mm.
one thing that you learn with traumatic events is you can try and run away from it all you want to. One day you're going to have to face it, and it's going to be extremely uncomfortable, and you're not going to enjoy the process of facing it and going through it and overcoming it. But once you make
Mm.
it to that mountaintop, it's so rewarding. And that's something that I had to learn, is not only do I have to acknowledge that what it was that I went through was traumatic, but I also had to work through it and figure out, figuring out what specific things triggered me and caused me to go into that state of mind where I felt like, I would say those things like, I don't know why I woke up this morning. I don't know why I'm here. I don't know why I was born. And that's when those thoughts of suicide ideation start to creep in. And, once you're able to identify your triggers, not only will you know what it is that's going to prompt a certain response, but you're also able to do that introspection and reflection and remind yourself like, hey, I've been here before. Instead of responding the same way that I used to, let me just change the way that I respond or remove myself from the situation so that I don't respond the same way that I used to.
Wow, that's good. So would you say childhood trauma can lead to adult depression?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. That's actually something that I had discussed in over a phone conversation with Dr. Ira
Mm.
in relation to that childhood trauma. Typically when childhood trauma takes place, that person mentally is still in that place. So
Yeah.
if something traumatic happened to somebody when they were at the age of 7 and they're 47 now, they still think like that 7-year-old when it comes to that specific traumatic event. And so they don't mature because that event is holding them back from
Mm.
being who they currently are physically. So their
Wow.
mental age is younger than their physical age. And it's really funny because I actually had the opportunity of seeing that firsthand with a patient that I had worked with at my job. And I was like, whoa, it's
Wow.
so crazy when you're actually able to see the things that we read about or hear
Yeah.
about. And it's crazy because they're still in that place. And you don't think that we always believe that, okay, when something really bad happens when we're younger, once we get older, we'll forget about it and it'll cease to
Yeah.
bother us. That couldn't be any farther away from the truth,
Mm.
especially when, yeah, I think that was a really good example.
Wow. Yeah. That is crazy. I feel as though I'm getting, the more you communicate and express your feelings. I remember one time somebody told me, he said, listen, this season, I'm gonna need you to feel your emotions, but not get stuck in them.
Mm.
And
Ooh.
when he said that, it really just allowed me to understand that this is the season where you have to separate your emotions from who you are and what you've done in the past. Maybe
Mm.
that thing that happened to you, but once you address it, feel that emotion again and realize this was not meant just to hurt me. I got a lesson out of it. I can, talk on talk shows like we're doing now and express to other people, because like I said, my problem was I didn't want to speak up because I felt as though people would shame me. I felt as though as people
Mm.
weak. I see it today, and even my like men, they they get exposed to like being soft around women, and people laugh and they go back up to just closing themselves up again because they don't like, humiliation
Right.
is hurts. It hurts so bad. Like that's
Mm-hmm.
one that will not have you to speak up. And
Right.
feeling your emotions is a key to overcoming, like you said. And it's crazy. It comes from the childhood. It really
Yeah.
does. Wow.
And that was
Um
a really good point that you just brought up in terms of the whole humiliation thing. Um, especially when you're younger, when you hear some of the things that your father might have heard when he was growing up, or your uncles, or your older brothers, or your older cousins, like hearing those things saying, "Oh, we don't really talk about our emotions because
mhm.
you know you don't need to. You stomach it. you keep it pushing, and eventually you'll work through it. And that's something that I had to learn, was how to be more expressive. And I think, at least for me, I found, like, when I was younger, I always had more friends that were girls than boys. And it was because I was so emotionally expressive. And that really helped me, especially when I started to go to counseling and therapy, because my therapist told me that it was because I was so willing to be expressive with, and I wasn't always expressive with a whole bunch of people, but with the people that I interacted with, that I felt I was close with, being able to express myself really helped me to process what was going on in my head. Whereas people that don't have that opportunity, they're always going to be like, oh man, you know, I got all this stuff in my head. And all those thoughts going on at once, it can drive somebody crazy. And I think that's what really pushes people over the edge, is having all those thoughts jumbled up in their head and not being able to express them.
Wow. You just hit all on my next question. So, wow. Can you give me like 5 methods from your presentation for you to overcome that state of being, you know, of letting go of your past? And why is that essential to overcoming like these thoughts? Like some methods that you know.
Okay. The first thing that comes to mind is, how are you going to know there's something wrong with you if you don't acknowledge it first? And that was the first thing that I learned when I finally took the initiative to go to counseling. That was the very first thing that my counselor brought up was, well, how do you know if you need this therapy? And I was like, because I know that I have some stuff that I've dealt with in the past that needs some addressing. And in order for me to overcome it, she said that she had told me that that was the first step, me acknowledging and addressing the issue. And so we can't get help if we don't see what's wrong with us at the time. And that is so critical, because so many people are walking around broken and don't even know that they're broken.
Wow.
So that was one of the very first methods that I included in the presentation. The second was seeking both professional and spiritual help. You know, you have spent some time in the church, so you know how most of the older members will say, oh, you know, give it to God, make sure you pray on it, and eventually all the stuff that you're worried about will go away. And although there is some truth behind that, it is also very important to get a combination of both professional help and spiritual help. Because once you have the two, one thing that I learned is, when we'll go trying to look for God in the wrong places, and he'll already give us the answer, but because we're so focused on looking at other places, it's directly right in our face. He's given us the resolution to our issues. It's just that at times we don't want to look at it. And I think that's something that has impacted the generations before us, especially when it comes to counseling and therapy and why it's considered such a taboo. But one thing that I learned is, you know, you have to go out there and get it for yourself. And especially with the professional help, honestly, I wouldn't have been able to overcome and grow as much as I have had it not been for that professional help. So it really is important to get a good combination of the two, and really be under the guidance of the right spiritual leaders too. I think that really helped contribute to my growth as well.
Wow. So that's amazing. Wow. So why is it essential for the person to let go of the past? Why is it so essential?
The analogy that my counselor used was a fishing hook. You ever watch the SpongeBob episode where him and Patrick are out in that field and they're eating cheese off the hooks?
Yeah.
And Patrick was eating the cheese, and then one of the hooks dragged him away.
Yes.
That's exactly what happens when we let our past hook onto us. It's gonna continue to drag us back to those past traumatic events and those occurrences, and we're gonna continue to stay there until we decide to take the initiative to take the hook out. or ask somebody to help us take the hook out. Because
Wow.
sometimes we don't even have the strength to take the hook out ourselves. We need that
Mhm.
extra push and help. And that's why it's so important and critical for us to have a very understanding and supportive group of people that are going to uplift us when we are in those dark places.
Wow. So you referenced several scriptures in aiding a person to overcome these thoughts. Could you please tell us why you chose Romans 8:18 for when somebody is feeling hopeless?
Okay. So for reference, for the listeners that don't know Romans 8 and 18 off the dome, it goes for, I consider from the standpoint of faith that the sufferings of the present in life will not compare to the glory that is about to be revealed to us and in us. So in that regard, especially when someone's feeling hopeless and they feel like they're stuck in a cycle.
Yep.
I definitely see it with certain people that I interact with on a daily basis. They feel like they're trapped in a cycle and they're never going to get free from it. And so they continue to do the same things over and over again. But one thing that I had to learn is that when you do the same thing over and over again and expect a different result, that is insanity. So one thing that I love about Romans 8:18 is it essentially tells us that, all right, I understand what it is that you're going through. Like, you may feel hopeless and you may feel like you're stuck in a rut, but guess what? Eventually, you're going to get out of it and you're going to look back on it and be like, yo, you can even laugh at it at times because it's so overwhelming in that moment. But once you overcome it, you're like, what was I stressed about?
Wow. Because it's crazy because you feel as though that it's the worst thing in the world. It's no point of moving forward. Like you said earlier, you don't want to get out of bed. You don't. You just want to stay there. And those are the signs to be like, okay, let me see what the issue is, and let me move forward past it, because you just, like, it's a cycle. You would just, until somebody speaks to you, until you get like mentors that can see, and it's like,
Yeah.
okay, I get it. It's not the end result. God has a plan for me and I need to just get through it, because it's not only going to help me, but it's going to help somebody else. So
Say that again. Say that again.
It's not only going to help me, but it's going to help somebody else. That's what I love by. I feel as though when you live like that, you don't care who gets the credit. You don't care who, wins. You just care as though, like, I'm getting through it because I can help somebody else. So it's like, So just last question, please leave a final thought with our audience after you tell them how they can reach you. So
before I do that, you touch, I think this is a great thing to leave off on, because you just said mouthful, and I don't even think you realize how powerful of a statement you just said. Like, sometimes we have to go through things to help somebody else down the line. And I have this saying that's, it's been with me now for like about a month. Somebody's salvation is dependent on my sacrifice. And so I'm perfectly fine with missing out on some things. I'm perfectly fine with, losing some friends, or losing out on a job, or losing nights of sleep praying for somebody. If it means that someone else is going to be able to benefit from it, by all means, I'm willing to take that sacrifice, because you never know. Like, you could say something so encouraging to somebody while they're in that mind space. Like, oh my gosh. they just hear it and they're like, oh wow, that's exactly what I need to hear right now. And that also too is like really important for me to remind myself, like, all right, I was able to help them, but God used me to help them. And that's why it's so important, like, to really just practice humility and give it back to God, because it's not our glory. It's not our glory that is coming to. It's going back to Him.
No, that is amazing. Just speaking on that, and we're wrapping it up. It's the last question. That was the last question, but it's crazy. Like you said, that thought was going in your head. The thought that's going in my head was that some people suffer publicly, so some people won't suffer privately. And that's something that I don't know where I heard that from, but that's just been in my head. I just see so many people go through things. Some people cannot physically be open about it.
Right.
You living so openly, and you being yourself, it just makes you feel so much better. It makes other people feel better. They're not alone. They don't feel alone. They don't feel like we talk about it's the end. I'm going through that same thing. Some millionaires, I know football players that go through mental illness, and they speak on it because you can get past it. You don't have to end. That's not the end result. So
right.
I thank you, Rex, for joining the show. Do you have any way to reach you? Anybody can reach you? Any or
absolutely. My main social media handle is on Instagram. You can find me at K1NGSIGMA_. That's King Sigma with a 1 as an I and an underscore at the end. And I also have, as you mentioned earlier, I have a podcast series. It's titled King's Tales. You can find me on all streaming platforms. We recently just got all of the episodes on the Apple Podcast, which was a huge development. I was so excited to see that. But you can find it at the title of the podcast series is King's Tales, KING_S TALES, and the creator should be my first and my last name, REX, last name CHEGE.
Wow. Well, this has been the Dr. Irish Show here on I Worship 96. We appreciate you for listening, and we'll be back here next week, the beginning our month on celebrating fathers and fatherhood at 9 a.m. Eastern time. Thank you so much.
Thank you for having me on this wondrous Saturday morning. So it was an honor and a pleasure, and I definitely appreciate this opportunity.
Likewise.
Alrighty.